The CEO destroyed her career in a single meeting, convinced she'd stolen nearly $500,000. 3 weeks later, her 9-year-old daughter walked into his office and proved him wrong. Rachel Quinn stood in the middle of her small office cubicle, trying to fix the smudge on her blouse with a napkin from her lunchbox. She'd spilled a drop of coffee earlier during the morning rush, and now it left a faint stain just above her waistline. It was barely noticeable, but Rachel cared about these things. She was the kind of person who showed up early, stayed late, and remembered everyone's birthday, even when no one remembered hers. She worked hard because she had to, but also because it mattered to her. Being dependable was the only thing she could fully control, in a world that had never been predictable. When the email popped up on her screen, her stomach dipped. It was from the CEO's office. Just one line. "Please come to my office immediately. G. Vale." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure what to write back. But another message appeared before she could reply. "Now, Miss Quinn." Rachel grabbed her tablet, smoothed her blouse again, and made the long walk down the corridor that led to the executive floor. The sound of her heels clicked against the polished floors, loud in the silence. People didn't often get summoned to Grayson Vale's office, and when they did, it was rarely for good news. She'd never spoken directly to him, outside of brief email instructions and the occasional dry "thank you" muttered in the hallway. Grayson Vale was a name whispered with awe and fear in equal parts. A billionaire genius who rarely smiled and never forgot a mistake. He was tall, precise, and cold, like the kind of man whose thoughts moved faster than the world could keep up with. When she stepped into the office, the atmosphere changed. The room was too bright, the silence too sharp. Grayson stood by the window, arms crossed, his face unreadable. "Sit," he said without turning around. Rachel lowered herself into the chair across from his desk, her hands resting on her knees, steadying herself. He walked over, dropped a folder in front of her, and finally looked her in the eye. "Do you know what this is?" She shook her head. "No, sir." "It's a report from our financial systems team," he said. "Someone has been siphoning money from client accounts over the past 3 months. The amount is just under $500,000. Rachel's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her heart thudded hard in her chest. "And the access credentials used," he continued, his voice like ice, "belonged to you." She blinked. "What?" "We traced the activity," he said. "Every login, every transaction. They were all performed using your profile, your password, from your terminal." "No," she said, finally finding her voice. "That's not possible. I never, Mr. Vale, I didn't do this." He watched her closely, his face unreadable. "I reviewed the data myself." Tears burned behind her eyes, but she forced herself not to cry. "There has to be a mistake. Someone must have." "I don't make decisions based on guesses, Ms. Quinn," he said, cutting her off. "I make them based on facts. And the facts point to you." Her throat tightened. "Please," she whispered. "I have a daughter. I need this job." His jaw clenched at the mention of her daughter, but his voice didn't soften. "Security will escort you out. HR will process your termination immediately. You'll be contacted if any further investigation is required." Rachel didn't move. Couldn't. The words sat heavy in the air. "You may go," he said. And just like that, everything she'd worked for was gone. Rachel stood frozen in the chair long after Grayson told her she could go. Her mind was racing, trying to catch up with what had just happened. Fired, accused, just like that. She felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Mr. Vale, please. I didn't do this." Grayson remained standing behind his sleek desk, eyes sharp, arms crossed. He didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't flinch. His silence only made the room colder. "I've worked here for 6 years," Rachel continued, her voice trembling. "I've never even taken a paperclip home. You know my record. You know I'd never—" I know what the data shows, he said, cutting her off. It shows your logins, your timestamps, your credentials used in the exact moments those funds were moved. But I didn't do it, she whispered. Someone had to use my account. Please, Mr. Vale, I would never steal. I don't even know how. The system doesn't lie, he replied, his tone final. And I don't have time for drama. Her breath caught. She looked up at him, desperately searching his face for a crack, a flicker of doubt, something that showed he was still human. But his expression was carved from stone. He turned away and picked up his phone. Security to my office. Rachel stood slowly, tears brimming in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not here, not in front of him. Her voice wavered as she said, "You're making a mistake." Grayson didn't respond. He was already moving on, already shifting his focus to the next email, the next meeting, as if her world hadn't just been ripped out from under her feet. The door opened behind her and two uniformed guards entered. One male, one female. They weren't rough, but they didn't look at her either. They just motioned toward the door and waited. Rachel turned back one last time. "I have a daughter," she said softly. That made him pause for just a second. His eyes flickered, then hardened again. "So do I," he said, though the way he said it felt like a wall, not a bridge. Rachel walked past the guards, her steps stiff and mechanical. As they led her through the office, heads turned. Whispered words floated behind her like smoke. She didn't try to hear them, but she felt them. The pity, the suspicion. The people who had smiled at her yesterday now looked at her like she was a stranger, or worse, a criminal. When they reached the lobby, she spotted Lila through the glass doors. Her 9-year-old daughter stood near the bike rack, clutching her backpack straps, swinging gently on her heels. She was waiting, just like every Friday, for her mom to take her out for their favorite end-of-week treat, vanilla cones and a walk in the park. Rachel's knees nearly buckled. She straightened herself before stepping outside. Her tears would wait. Her panic would wait. She had to smile for Lila, even if it shattered her inside. "Hey, sweetheart," she said as cheerfully as she could manage. Lila looked up and immediately noticed the tightness in her mother's eyes, the stiffness in her smile. "Did something happen?" she asked. Rachel opened her mouth, but no words came out. Just a small, painful nod. And Lila, who had always been more observant than any child her age should be, reached for her mother's hand and squeezed it tightly, saying nothing at all. The apartment was too quiet when they got home. Rachel unlocked the door with the same movements she'd done 100 times. But this time, everything felt different. The soft click of the lock, the creak of the hinges, even the smell of lemon cleaner and laundry soap that usually made the place feel warm, all felt like echoes from a life she wasn't sure still belonged to her. She dropped her bag on the floor without even unzipping it and walked into the kitchen. The groceries she'd bought yesterday were still sitting in the fridge, waiting for a weekend that now felt uncertain. She pulled out 2 glasses, filled them with water, and handed one to Lila, who took it silently. They didn't speak much at dinner. Rachel reheated leftovers from the night before, moving like she was underwater, slowly and with no urgency. Lila didn't complain, didn't ask why they weren't getting their usual ice cream cones, didn't ask why Rachel hadn't smiled once since they left the office building. She just ate quietly, her small hands steady, her eyes following her mother with quiet concern. Afterward, Rachel stood at the sink, washing the dishes like it was the one thing left she could still do right. The water was hot, almost too hot, but she welcomed the sting on her hands. It kept her grounded. 1 plate, 1 bowl, 2 forks, a spoon. Simple things. Easy things. Things that didn't accuse her or ruin her life. Tears began to fall without warning, sliding down her cheeks and into the soapy water. She didn't sob, didn't break down loudly. She just cried silently, her shoulders trembling as she scrubbed at a plate that was already clean. The sound of the faucet masked the shakiness of her breath. but Lila noticed anyway. Lila had been sitting at the kitchen table drawing with her markers, but now she stood quietly beside her mom, not saying anything, just watching. Her drawing was forgotten. It had been a picture of them holding hands in front of the office building, back when Rachel still had a job, back when Friday still meant ice cream and weekend movie nights. Rachel pressed her palms into the counter and bowed her head. The weight of everything pressed down on her. The firing, the accusation, the rent that was due next week, the empty savings account, the child who depended on her. All of it felt like it might crush her if she let herself feel it for even 1 second longer. "I didn't do it," she whispered, almost too softly to hear. "I swear, Lila, I didn't do anything wrong." "I know," Lila said from behind her, her voice small but certain. Rachel turned around, eyes red and shining. Lila stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist, holding her like she was the one doing the protecting now. Rachel knelt down and hugged her back, burying her face in Lila's shoulder. For a long time, they stayed like that, quiet, tangled in each other, the warmth of their small kitchen now holding the weight of 1,000 fears neither of them had asked for. And in the silence, as Rachel held her daughter close, she realized this was the hardest part. Not the job, not the shame, not even the uncertainty. It was the feeling that she had to carry it all alone. But Lila wasn't letting her. Not this time. Lila sat cross-legged on her bed, the dim light from her bedside lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. Her sketchpad was open, but she wasn't drawing tonight. Instead, she stared at the page, filled with little notes and scribbles only she could understand. Names, times, small things she'd noticed but hadn't known were important until now. She chewed on the end of her pencil, deep in thought. Her mom had cried herself to sleep again. Lila had heard the muffled sobs through the thin walls, even though Rachel tried to be quiet. She always tried to be strong, always smiled for Lila even when she was breaking inside. But Lila wasn't a little kid who didn't notice things. She saw the worry in her mom's eyes, the way she stared at the mailbox like it held bad news, the way she flinched when the phone rang, and Lila hated feeling helpless. But tonight, she wasn't going to just sit around hoping things would fix themselves. Her dad hadn't raised her like that. He used to say, "Always look twice, Lila. Most people only see what's in front of them. The smart ones look behind it." He'd been a data analyst, quiet and kind, always reading things other people skipped over. Lila had his way of seeing the world, even though he'd been gone for 3 years now. She still remembered sitting on his lap while he worked, how he explained that patterns were everywhere if you knew how to look for them. She tapped her pencil on the page and thought back to the last few weeks at her mom's office. She visited there often, especially after school on Fridays. It wasn't just a place of work to her, it was part of her routine, her second home. She remembered how her mom's desk always had sticky notes with neat little reminders, how her computer was locked when she got up, how she'd always double-check before stepping away. But someone else had been hanging around lately. Brett. Lila didn't know his full name, just that he worked in accounting and always laughed a little too loud. He was friendly, always giving Lila gum or asking her about school, but something about him had always made her feel weird. She remembered seeing him at her mom's desk once, said he was dropping off paperwork, but her mom hadn't been there, and his eyes kept darting toward her mom's computer screen. Then there was the USB drive. Lila remembered it clearly, small, silver, and wedged behind her mom's keyboard one afternoon. Her mom hadn't noticed it until Lila pointed it out. "Must be from Brett," Rachel had said absent-mindedly. "He borrowed my laptop yesterday for the finance meeting." That moment stuck with Lila. Now she grabbed her old-school tablet, the one she used for games and reading. It wasn't fancy, but she knew how to check file names and basic activity logs. Her dad had taught her before he passed. She opened a search bar and started typing everything she could remember. USB types, Brett's name, terms like finance logs and credential sharing. She didn't understand everything, but she was learning. She opened a file labeled Friday Notes, where she jotted little things she'd overheard. Like when Brett had been joking with a coworker in the hallway and said, "Nobody's watching the little stuff. That's the trick." She hadn't thought much of it then, but now it sounded different. Lila sat up straighter, her heart beating faster. She wasn't just imagining things. Something was wrong. She didn't know exactly what Brett had done, or how, but she was going to find out, because someone had framed her mom, and Lila Quinn was done being quiet. The receptionist looked down at Lila over the rim of her coffee cup, confused at first, then concerned. "Sweetheart, are you here with someone?" she asked gently. Lila stood with her backpack slung over one shoulder, clutching a small notebook in both hands. She nodded politely but said nothing. She had already asked to speak with Mr. Grayson Vale, and had been told he was in meetings all day, so she sat down on one of the tall lobby chairs, swinging her legs and waiting. 3 hours passed. Most people came and went without noticing her. A few gave her curious glances. No one asked questions. She didn't fidget or complain. She just sat quietly, her notebook in her lap, watching the elevator doors, watching the people. A security guard offered her a bottle of water. She accepted it with a smile and a quiet thank you. Finally, a tall woman in a navy blazer stepped off the elevator and spotted Lila still sitting there. She frowned and walked to the receptionist. "Why is there a child in the lobby?" She said she wanted to see Mr. Vale. "I didn't think—" "I'll call up," the woman said, already dialing. 5 minutes later, the elevator doors opened again, and Grayson Vale stepped out, looking sharp in his dark gray suit, sleeves rolled to the elbows, phone still in his hand. He glanced around, irritated, until his eyes landed on Lila. He blinked, confused. What is she doing here? Lila stood up calmly and walked toward him with her notebook held tightly to her chest. Her small frame looked even smaller next to him, but her posture was steady, her eyes locked on his. "You fired the wrong person," she said. The room seemed to quiet around them. A few heads turned, but no one moved. Grayson's brow furrowed. He didn't speak right away. "You're Rachel Quinn's daughter," he said finally. Lila nodded. "And I have something you need to see." "This isn't a place for—" "It's about the money," she interrupted, her voice firm. "About the fake accounts and the login thing. It wasn't my mom." Grayson looked at her, then at the woman beside him, then back at Lila. He didn't see a scared little girl. He saw a determined one. He gestured for her to follow. Upstairs, they walked into a quiet side conference room. Grayson shut the door behind them. "You have 5 minutes," he said. Lila sat at the table and opened her notebook. Inside were pages of careful handwriting, diagrams, lists of names and times. She flipped to a page with a sketch of her mom's desk and pointed to a note she'd written weeks ago about Brett from accounting. "He used a USB stick and borrowed my mom's laptop. After that, she started having problems with her login. He said it was nothing. But I saw him near her desk when she wasn't there." Grayson leaned over her notebook, skimming the notes, his eyes narrowing. "And this," she said, pulling out a printed screenshot from her tablet, "is from when he said, 'Nobody watches the little stuff.' I didn't think about it until now." Grayson took the paper. It wasn't hard proof, not yet, but it was more than anyone else had given him, more than he'd expected from a 9-year-old girl. He sat down slowly, across from her. "Why didn't your mother bring this?" "Because she doesn't know," Lila said. "She still thinks you wouldn't believe her." Grayson looked down at the notebook again, then at Lila, really seeing her for the first time. "Maybe I didn't fire the wrong person," he said quietly. "Maybe I failed to listen." Lila didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her eyes said enough. Grayson leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, the notebook still open on the glass table in front of him. He hadn't expected this. Not the child's stubbornness, not the way she sat there quietly, with her chin lifted, her eyes steady, like she belonged in boardrooms and didn't flinch under pressure. Most adults in his company wouldn't even look him in the eye when he questioned them. But this girl, this tiny force of nature, was staring him down like she knew something he didn't. And that irritated him. He had a schedule, a stack of meetings, a dozen problems to solve. And somehow, this kid had just barged into his building and demanded attention like she was holding the keys to something important. But still, something in her manner kept him from brushing her off. He studied her a little longer. Her shoes were scuffed, her backpack fraying at the seams, and her notebook had bent corners and messy handwriting. But her words were focused, intentional. She reminded him of someone, himself, maybe, back when he was just starting, back before the money and the boardrooms, when instinct had been everything, and no one believed he could make anything real. "You said you know who framed your mother," he said at last, his voice low. "Why don't you just tell me?" Lila shook her head. "Because you won't believe me unless you actually listen." "I am listening." "No, you're hearing me," she said, leaning forward slightly. "But you're not listening. You're waiting for me to mess up, to say something wrong so you can prove I'm just a kid who doesn't know what she's talking about." Grayson blinked. He was used to being read by people who were trained to do it. Lawyers, journalists, competitors, not fourth graders. "I watched everything," Lila continued. "People don't notice kids when they're doing adult things. But I see details. I saw who sat at my mom's desk when she wasn't there. I saw who borrowed her laptop and left a USB stick plugged in after he walked away. And I know when the weird charges started." Her fingers tapped the table once, twice. She took a breath. "But if you're just going to sit there waiting to prove I'm wrong, then I'm not saying anything else. Because my mom already cried for 3 nights, and I'm not doing this to get her in more trouble. I came here because I thought maybe you'd care more about the truth than about being right." Grayson's jaw tightened. She had a sharp edge to her, one that came from watching too much, growing up too fast. He recognized it because he remembered what it was like to be the one no one took seriously. The one who got shut down before they even finished speaking. He reached for the notebook again and flipped a few pages. Notes, observations, dates. It wasn't just guesswork. It was a pattern. It was a start. "Let's say I believe you," he said finally. "Then what?" Lila shrugged. "Then we stop the person who did this, and you make it right." There was nothing childish about her answer. Nothing theatrical. Just quiet certainty. And for the first time since the accusation surfaced, Grayson felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Doubt. Maybe he had made a mistake. Maybe the system wasn't as perfect as he thought. Maybe the real evidence had been sitting in the lobby for 3 hours, holding a notebook full of truth he hadn't bothered to see. Grayson sat at the edge of the conference table, arms folded, watching Lila fidget with the zipper on her backpack. She hadn't said much for the past few minutes, just stared at the floor like she was debating something with herself. He waited, quietly, not pushing her. That part surprised even him. Normally, he didn't have patience for silences. But this wasn't a normal situation, and Lila Quinn wasn't a normal kid. Finally, she pulled something out of her backpack and set it on the table. A small, silver flash drive, worn at the edges, the kind people handed out at conferences and forgot about the next day. "I found this in my mom's old planner," she said softly, her voice steadier than before. She didn't know it was there. It was stuck behind the pen loop. Grayson picked it up carefully, turning it between his fingers. "You think it's important?" "I know it is," Lila said. "I saw Brett Langford, messing with my mom's stuff. He always found a reason to be near her desk. He said it was about numbers or reports, but he'd touch things. Her keyboard, her mouse. Once, I saw him slip something into her drawer when she wasn't looking." "And you didn't tell anyone?" "I did," Lila said, her jaw tightening. "I told the receptionist, and she said I probably misunderstood. I told my mom once too, but she just smiled and said Brett was harmless." Grayson nodded slowly. He knew Brett. Mid-level finance department, sharp with numbers, overly confident, a smooth talker with a habit of being just a little too helpful. Grayson had never trusted him. But there hadn't been anything solid to act on. Until now. He stood and walked to the computer terminal in the corner, plugging in the flash drive. Lila followed him, watching the screen with wide eyes as folders loaded one by one. The labels were ordinary: Q2 review, vendor report, backup. But when he opened the first folder, Grayson's face changed. Each document was time-stamped: internal memos, authorization forms, and then a file named alt login record.csv. He clicked it open. Lines and lines of access data scrolled down the screen. Activity from Rachel's profile. At times she was known to be off the clock. The IP addresses didn't match her computer. Someone had used a cloned credential system to mimic her access from another terminal. Grayson swore under his breath. This wasn't just carelessness. This was precision. Someone had planted fake access logs and files tied directly to Rachel's credentials. And now, here it was, sitting on a flash drive found in her planner. The one thing she never left at work. She didn't put that there, Lila said quietly, her eyes still on the screen. I know, Grayson replied, already backing up the files. This was meant to make her look guilty. If anyone checked deeper. He turned and looked at her, really looked at her. How did you know this was important? Because I remember, Lila said simply. And because I watch. Grayson didn't answer right away. He just gave a short nod. The evidence wasn't complete yet, but it was enough to change everything. Enough to make him realize the truth had been in front of him all along, and it had come from a child who refused to be ignored. Grayson sat alone in his home office, long past midnight, the glow of the monitor casting shadows across his sharp features. His tie lay forgotten on the corner of the desk, and his sleeves were rolled up, exposing forearms tense with focus. The flash drive Lila had given him was plugged into the port beside the keyboard, its tiny light blinking like a pulse, steady and alive. He had run the diagnostics 3 times already, but this time he slowed down, going file by file, reading every line of data with eyes trained by years of experience in security and finance. The deeper he went, the colder his chest became. It started in his ribs, like a quiet ache, then spread until it felt like something inside him was locking down. There were logs he recognized immediately. Login timestamps that didn't align with Rachel's schedule. Remote access from IP addresses that didn't belong to her department. Flagged login attempts, masked under administrator override protocols. There were entire folders marked with internal finance codes, each one perfectly mimicking real files, except for subtle differences, slight decimal errors, altered account numbers, timestamps off by seconds, too clean, too deliberate. Then came the fake invoices. He stared at the first one for a long time. It looked like a standard vendor payment form. He'd signed hundreds just like it. But this one was a duplicate of a file Rachel had processed a month before, with a single change in routing information. The payment had gone through, but not to the vendor. It had been rerouted to an offshore account. He opened the next one. Same pattern. Then another. All in Rachel's name, all approved with her credentials, all carefully constructed to fall just beneath the internal review threshold. The thief hadn't just framed her, they'd studied her habits, mirrored her tone in email approvals, mimicked her formatting in spreadsheets. It was brilliant in a sickening way. Grayson leaned back and exhaled through his nose, jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. The files on this drive were never meant to be found. They were insurance, kept close enough to control, but far enough to avoid suspicion. Hidden in a planner Rachel never opened after the firing, left behind like a forgotten weapon, waiting to destroy her a second time if needed. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, then moved quickly. He cross-referenced the metadata on the files with the company's internal access logs. He pulled footage from office security, matched timestamps, noted discrepancies. A pattern emerged. Someone had been logging in from terminals 2 floors away from Rachel's desk. Terminals assigned to Brett Langford. The name appeared again and again in the network trail, just under the radar, always nearby, always watching. Grayson sat in silence, staring at the name. He remembered how Brett had always seemed eager to help, always smiling, always just happening to be around. He'd been promoted last year for his efficiency. Grayson had signed off on it personally. Now his stomach turned. Rachel hadn't stolen anything. She had been framed from the start. And he, the man who thought he could read anyone, had fallen for it. He'd fired her, humiliated her, taken away her security, all because someone had played him. He looked down at the flash drive, still glowing faintly in the dark, and whispered the words that sat like lead in his throat. I was wrong, and this time, someone else had paid the price. The next morning, Grayson was already in his office before sunrise. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, and his mind hadn't rested for a second. The files from the flash drive kept replaying in his head, each piece of data stacking against the truth he could no longer ignore. Rachel Quinn was innocent, and he had destroyed her life with nothing but blind trust in a system that was never designed to catch deception dressed as loyalty. At exactly 8:30, the receptionist called up and said a little girl was in the lobby again. Grayson didn't hesitate. Send her up. Lila walked into the conference room 5 minutes later, holding a crumpled folder to her chest and a look of quiet determination in her eyes. She didn't wait for him to greet her. She pulled out a sheet of paper and slid it across the table. I think this is what you needed. Grayson picked it up, frowning. It was a printout, slightly blurry, but clear enough to see what mattered. A reflection caught in the glossy surface of a plastic folder. In the photo, a man was sitting at a computer. Not just any computer, Rachel's. The timestamp in the corner of the screen matched one of the unauthorized logins he had found just hours earlier. Where did you get this? He asked, voice low. I took it, Lila said. By accident. That day I was doing homework at her desk after school. Brett came by and said he needed to print something fast. He told me to grab my stuff and go wait outside. I left in a hurry, but my folder must have been on the desk. It's shiny, see? It reflected him sitting there. Grayson stared at the image again. Brett Langford, leaning slightly to the left, eyes on the monitor, one hand on the keyboard. The monitor showed an open spreadsheet. A closer look revealed the file name at the top, Vendor Q3 Report XLSX, one of the doctored invoices. He looked back at Lila, his throat tightening. You didn't know what this was at the time? I thought it was weird, she said. But people never listen when kids say weird stuff, so I just kept it. You printed it? I printed everything I thought might help. She pulled more pages from her folder. Notes, copies of access times, old emails she'd overheard her mom mention but hadn't understood until now. Grayson sank into the chair across from her. He'd never felt smaller in his life. A child had done more in a week than his entire internal audit team had managed in 3 months. And she hadn't done it for recognition or praise. She'd done it because her mom was hurting and no one else had believed her. You've been incredibly brave, he said quietly. Lila looked up at him, cautious. Are you going to fix it now? Yes, he said. I'm going to fix everything. The photo in his hand was more than evidence. It was a reckoning. And now that he saw it, there was no going back. Grayson stood in front of the apartment door, staring at the faded number and trying to find the right words. He had written a dozen versions of what he wanted to say, rehearsed each one in his mind on the drive over. But now, standing there with the hum of the hallway light buzzing above him and the weight of guilt pressing into his chest, everything seemed inadequate. He knocked once, then again, softer this time. For a moment, there was no sound. Then came the shuffle of feet and the quiet click of the lock. The door opened a few inches, and Rachel's face appeared in the gap, tired and wary. Her expression didn't change when she saw him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, not opening the door further. "I need to talk to you," Grayson said. "Please." She hesitated, then stepped back and let the door swing open. He entered slowly, his eyes sweeping across the small space. It was neat, clean, but tired-looking. A jacket draped over a chair, children's books stacked neatly on a shelf, and on the kitchen counter, a mug with Lila's name written in marker. Rachel crossed her arms and stayed standing. She didn't offer him a seat. She didn't ask if he wanted water. She didn't make this easy. "I was wrong," Grayson began, voice low. "About everything. About you." Rachel didn't blink. "It took you long enough. I have the proof now," he continued. "Brett was behind it. The access logs, the fake invoices, everything. He framed you, used your credentials. I should have seen it. I should have—" "But you didn't," Rachel cut in, her voice calm but sharp. "You didn't ask questions. You didn't even hesitate. You believed the system over me. Code over character." Her words stung because they were true. Grayson lowered his eyes. "You're right. I worked for you for 6 years," she said. "Not once did I give you a reason to doubt me. I stayed late. I picked up extra shifts. I kept your schedule running when half your board couldn't even remember what day it was. And all it took was one file with my name on it for you to throw me away." Grayson nodded, the shame pressing heavier with every word. "I didn't come here to defend myself," he said quietly. "I came to apologize. And to thank your daughter. She showed me what I was too blind to see." At that moment, Lila stepped into the hallway, arms crossed, watching them both. Her eyes didn't carry anger, just disappointment, deeper than her years. She didn't say anything, but her silence spoke louder than any words could. "I know I can't undo what I did," Grayson said, turning slightly toward her. "But I want to make things right. I'll clear your name, publicly. I'll reinstate your position, if you'll take it, and make sure this never happens to you again." Rachel looked at him, long and hard. "I don't care about the job right now," she said. "I care that my daughter had to carry this on her own, because she didn't think any adult would listen. That's what needs fixing." Grayson nodded, humbled. "I hear you." Rachel gave the smallest nod in return but said nothing else. She didn't need to. The apology had been made, but forgiveness, if it ever came, would have to be earned. Grayson closed the door to the small, glass-walled meeting room, the sound of it clicking shut more final than it should have been. Brett Langford sat at the table, leaning back casually, one ankle resting over the other knee. He wore that same easy smile he always did, like the world was a game and he already knew the outcome. "What's this about?" Brett asked, tapping a pen against his palm. "I've got end-of-quarter numbers to finish." Grayson didn't sit. He placed a slim folder on the table in front of him, then slid a tablet beside it. Screen dark for now. He didn't speak right away. He just watched Brett, and something about the silence made the other man shift slightly in his chair. "I'm going to give you one chance," Grayson said, his voice calm but cold. "One chance to tell the truth, before I show you what I already know." Brett chuckled, but the sound was thinner than usual. "What truth is that?" "That you used Rachel Quinn's credentials to move company funds," Grayson said. "That you planted evidence to frame her. That you nearly tanked the reputation of someone who spent 6 years building trust here." Brett's smile tightened. "That's a bold accusation." Grayson pressed the power button on the tablet and turned the screen toward him. The photo loaded first. Brett reflected in the glossy folder cover, seated at Rachel's desk, fingers on her keyboard, timestamp visible. Brett glanced at it and scoffed. "That's barely proof. Could be anyone." Grayson swiped to the next screen. Network logs, login timestamps, remote access activity, linked to Brett's terminal. Side-by-side comparisons with Rachel's work hours. Brett's expression didn't change right away, but the tap of his pen slowed, then stopped. I also have the flash drive, Grayson continued. The one with cloned access files and rerouted invoices. The one found in Rachel's planner. You remember the planner, don't you? You were seen near her desk the same day it was left behind. Brett leaned forward, folding his hands. But the smile was gone now. In its place was something harder. You've been busy, he said. Is this where you pretend to care about the company while trying to corner me? This is where I give you a chance to talk before this becomes a criminal investigation, Grayson said. Because if it does, you won't be the only one questioned. Everyone who touched those files, who ignored the red flags, who signed off without checking, every single one of them will be dragged into it. Brett's eyes narrowed. You think I acted alone? He asked, voice low. You think I'm the only one who's been taking a little off the top? You're smarter than that, Grayson. Grayson didn't flinch. If I go down, Brett continued, I'm taking others with me. People you trust. People who've been in this company longer than Rachel ever was. You open this door, you'd better be ready to deal with what comes through it. Grayson stared at him, unblinking. I'm not the one who should be worried, he said. Then he gathered the tablet and the folder, stood, and left Brett sitting in silence. For the first time since this started, Grayson saw what fear looked like on a man who thought he was untouchable. Grayson stood near the window of the conference room, arms crossed, staring out at the city skyline without really seeing it. The weight of what he'd uncovered had only grown heavier since his confrontation with Brett. What began as a single act of betrayal had cracked wide open into something far worse, a network of quiet cooperation, tucked deep within the company's finance team. Names he recognized, people he trusted, had been looping money through false vendors and ghost accounts, all hidden beneath a blanket of forged approvals and shadowed transactions. He turned when he heard the door open. Rachel stepped in first, her face unreadable, her movements cautious. Lila followed behind her, clutching the same worn notebook, her eyes sharp and steady. They sat at the far end of the table. Rachel kept her purse in her lap like she wasn't planning to stay long. I know I have no right to ask for your time, Grayson began. But I need your help. Rachel didn't respond. She just waited, hands folded tight. Grayson walked to the table and laid out a printout of network logs and routing diagrams. Brett wasn't working alone, he said. This wasn't just one person stealing under the radar. It's been going on longer than we thought. Multiple people, all inside the finance department. Rachel looked at the papers, her lips pressing into a thin line. And now you need the person you fired to fix it for you? I need the person who built half our internal systems and knows our vendors better than anyone else, he said quietly. I can't trust the team inside. They've already failed to catch it, or they're part of it. You're the only one outside of their circle who understands the structure. Rachel shook her head. I'm done, Grayson. I don't work here anymore, remember? You made that clear. You were right not to trust me, he said. I failed you, and I failed Lila, but this isn't just about fixing my mistake anymore. It's about stopping the damage from spreading. Rachel hesitated. She looked tired, guarded. Her pride and her pain were holding her back, and she had every right to protect herself. But Lila shifted in her chair and spoke before her mother could say anything more. We can't let him hurt other moms like you. The words were soft, almost a whisper, but they landed in the room like a thunderclap. Rachel turned to her daughter, blinking. Sweetheart, this isn't your responsibility. He's not just stealing money, Lila said, looking straight at Grayson. He's stealing safety from people who work hard and don't even know they're in danger. Grayson stayed quiet. He didn't want to interrupt what he could never say better himself. Rachel looked down at the papers again. She saw the damage, the threads of corruption tangled around names she had once respected. And she saw Lila, her daughter, the little girl who had carried the weight of this when no one else would. The same girl who still believed her mom could make things right. She let out a long breath. Then she nodded once. "Fine," she said. "I'll help. But not for you." Grayson met her eyes. "I know." And in that moment, they all understood. This wasn't just about clearing a name anymore. It was about fighting for everyone who didn't have someone like Lila in their corner. The office was quiet by the time the sun dipped below the city skyline. Most of the staff had gone home, and the hum of the building softened into something calm, almost private. Inside Grayson's executive conference room, 3 figures worked under the soft glow of a desk lamp. Papers spread across the long table like pieces of a broken puzzle waiting to be rearranged. Rachel sat in front of her old laptop, now reconnected to the company network. Her fingers moved quickly over the keys, pulling up files, cross-referencing logs, scrolling through spreadsheets with the kind of familiarity that made Grayson wonder how he'd ever doubted her. She didn't ask for help, didn't wait for permission. She just worked, methodically, intensely, like a woman with something to prove and a child to protect. Grayson stood nearby, leaning over a separate monitor, running real-time diagnostics based on the leads Rachel was uncovering. Every now and then, their eyes would meet and exchange a silent nod. Not quite trust, but something close. He watched the way she processed information, how she caught tiny errors in vendor reports, and questioned inconsistencies that had gone unnoticed by the internal team for months. It reminded him of why he'd hired her in the first place. Rachel Quinn didn't just do her job. She understood the heart of the system, the rhythm behind the numbers. Lila sat at the end of the table with a plate of apple slices, her notebook open again. She didn't speak much, just watched. She chewed quietly, one leg swinging back and forth under the chair. But every so often, she scribbled something down and slid it toward Rachel without a word. Rachel would glance at it, pause, then blink at the screen, like Lila had just pointed out something she had missed. "She notices patterns I forget to look for," Rachel murmured, after the 3rd time, half to herself. Grayson looked over the note, a simple diagram Lila had drawn, connecting the names of 3 employees with arrows and timestamps. It matched one of the routing anomalies he had flagged earlier, but Lila had found it without any software, just from memory. "You have a scary smart kid," he said. Rachel smiled, just faintly. "She takes after her dad." The moment passed quietly, but something shifted between them. Not warmth exactly, but the beginnings of respect rebuilding where hurt had lived. Hours passed. The digital clock on the wall ticked past 10. Coffee cups gathered in clusters. Screens glowed with spreadsheets and transaction reports. They were building something together, not just a case, but a partnership built from pieces that had once been broken. Lila yawned, but didn't stop working. Rachel brushed a hand gently through her daughter's hair as she typed with her other hand. Grayson noticed the gesture, something small and soft that reminded him of how much he'd overlooked. He'd been so focused on systems and evidence that he'd forgotten people had stories behind their silence. Tonight, those stories were being heard, and for the first time in weeks, the company felt like it was heading towards something right. Grayson sat at the head of the table, rubbing the bridge of his nose as the plan took shape on the whiteboard behind him. Rachel stood beside him, arms folded, her eyes scanning the outlines they'd drafted. Dummy vendor profiles, false invoice trails, and carefully timed system alerts. It wasn't just a trap, it was a mirror, designed to reflect the exact pattern the conspirators had used against her. Only this time, every step would be recorded, traced, and locked in place before they could cover their tracks. "We need a fake vendor with just enough history to look real," Rachel said, pointing to a line item. "Something mid-level, not flashy, buried in a project they won't double-check." "I'll route it through a shell contract," Grayson added. "Make it look like a mistake from one of the newer departments. They'll think it's another blind spot." Rachel nodded. "And when they try to intercept it, the access logs will catch the exact time and terminal." Grayson leaned back in his chair, watching her as she worked. She was sharp, focused, calm under pressure, in a way that couldn't be taught. He didn't say it out loud, but every minute they spent planning only confirmed what he now understood. Rachel Quinn should have never been pushed out. She should have been running this side of the company years ago. At the far end of the room, Lila sat curled up in one of the chairs, legs tucked under her, notebook open again. She was quiet, as always, but she hadn't stopped listening. "I want to help," she said suddenly, lifting her head. Rachel glanced over. "Sweetheart, you already have." "I mean during the sting," Lila said. "I want to watch from home. I can monitor the logs on the tablet. If something looks off, I'll see it. I always do." Grayson looked between them, unsure. "That's a lot of responsibility." Lila didn't flinch. "I see things adults don't." Rachel hesitated, then nodded slowly. "She's right. If they try to move faster than expected, she'll catch it before we do." Grayson knelt beside Lila's chair, his voice softer now. "Are you sure you're okay with this? It might get messy." Lila looked him dead in the eye. "It's already messy. I just want to help clean it up." There was no arguing with that. They gave her limited access, just enough to monitor activity and alert them if anything changed. She'd be logged into a decoy system from home, where she could watch from a safe distance while Rachel and Grayson coordinated the operation on site. By midnight, the trap was set. A single invoice, flagged with a subtle error, had been planted. A notification delay was programmed into the system so the fraud team wouldn't see it until after the bait had been touched. Only those who thought they were above detection would notice and take it. Rachel stood by the glass wall, staring out into the city lights. "They think no one's watching," she said quietly. Grayson joined her. "They're wrong." And in the corner, Lila scribbled one final note. Her handwriting was a little crooked, but the words were clear. "Let them try." The office felt different that morning, still and charged. Like the air before a storm, no one knew what was coming, except for 3 people: Grayson, Rachel, and Lila. The trap they had carefully built over the last few days was finally in motion. All that was left was to wait, watch, and catch the moment when the truth revealed itself. Rachel sat at her old desk, freshly reinstated but not yet public, eyes locked on the screen in front of her. The dummy invoice had been approved just after midnight, and was now sitting quietly in the system, waiting to be noticed by the wrong hands. Only a few people had the clearance to act on it, and they knew exactly who those people were. Upstairs, Grayson watched from his office, security feeds running in the background. A second monitor opened to live network activity log. The IT team, looped in at the last moment, had installed silent tracking tools to record any unauthorized actions taken against the bait transaction. Nothing would escape detection. At home, Lila sat cross-legged on the living room floor, with her tablet in her lap, eyes sharp, fingers steady. Her setup was simple but powerful. Just enough access to flag changes, monitor signal pings, and spot patterns. Her mom had checked in on her 3 times already, but she didn't need supervision. She was calm, focused, ready. At 9:42 a.m., the first alert hit. Lila saw it first. A login attempt from a remote terminal registered to Brett's department, accessing the dummy vendor. She tapped the screen twice, flagging the time and user ID, then called Rachel. "He's in," she said. Rachel relayed it to Grayson immediately, and a team of compliance officers and legal advisors went on standby. The system continued logging every move, Brett copying the invoice, adjusting account numbers, masking the approval trail. He had done it before, and he was confident, too confident. At 9:57, 2 more user IDs joined the system, both from finance, both previously clean, but now they were navigating the exact same network path, modifying a parallel transaction, linking it to the same fake vendor. Grayson watched the data flood in, layer after layer of tampering unfolding in real time. At 10:06, the final player entered, Someone from procurement. Someone Rachel had suspected early on, but never had proof against. Now, she did. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly, and looked over at Grayson. They're all in. He picked up the phone and called legal. 15 minutes later, security teams and HR descended on the finance floor. There was no scene, no shouting, just quiet steps and cold facts. Brett was escorted out first, his face pale, his charm vanished. The others followed, stunned and silent, realizing too late that the game was over. By noon, 4 employees were placed on immediate administrative leave pending criminal investigation. Evidence packets were handed to corporate legal and turned over to the police by end of day. Grayson stood in the middle of the conference room where it had all begun and looked at Rachel, who was calmly watching the final pieces fall into place. You were right, he said. Rachel didn't gloat. She just gave a small nod and looked down at the printed logs in her hand. Truth doesn't need to be loud, she said. It just needs to be clear. And today, it finally was. The conference hall was packed. Employees filled every row of chairs, the hum of quiet chatter buzzing beneath the high ceiling. Most of them didn't know what to expect. The invite had simply said, mandatory company-wide meeting with no further details. Some whispered guesses about another restructuring, others murmured about the recent rumors circling the finance department. But no one spoke Rachel Quinn's name aloud. Not yet. Grayson stood backstage, adjusting the cuff of his jacket, scanning the crowd through a narrow gap in the curtain. His heart thudded steadily, not with nerves, but with something else. Responsibility, regret, resolve. It had taken him weeks to clean up the mess Brett and the others left behind, but it had taken even longer to admit, publicly and without excuses, that he had been wrong. Rachel stood beside him, straight-backed in a navy blouse and black slacks, the same outfit she'd worn on the day he fired her. Lila held her hand, dressed in a simple blue dress and sneakers, her notebook clutched tightly to her chest. She looked up at her mom, then at Grayson, her expression unreadable. She wasn't afraid, just quiet, watching, like always. When Grayson stepped onto the stage, the room hushed. Phones went still. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. All eyes turned to him. Good morning, he began, his voice echoing through the room. I won't take much of your time, but what I have to say is long overdue. He took a slow breath and looked straight ahead. 3 weeks ago, we discovered an internal scheme involving the misappropriation of company funds. Several individuals, some of whom had been trusted members of this team, were found to be working together to steal from the company and cover their tracks by framing someone else. A ripple moved through the crowd. Grayson continued. That someone was Rachel Quinn. All heads turned toward her as she walked out onto the stage beside him. Lila followed, standing just to her right. Rachel held her chin high, not with pride, but with the quiet strength of someone who had walked through fire and come out stronger. I fired Rachel, Grayson said plainly. I believed false data. I trusted flawed systems over a person who had never once given me a reason to doubt her. I let my own blind spots hurt someone who had only ever served this company with loyalty and excellence. He turned slightly to Rachel. Today, I offer not just an apology, but a correction. He turned back to the crowd. Rachel has been fully reinstated. Effective immediately, she will lead internal systems reform to ensure this never happens again. And she won't be doing it alone. He looked down at Lila and smiled. Because this little girl, he said, saw what none of us did. She paid attention. She asked the right questions. And when the adults failed, she didn't. There was a long, stunned silence. Then, slowly, the room began to applaud. First a few, then more, until it became a standing ovation. Rachel looked over at Lila, who didn't smile, but nodded, proud and steady. They stood side by side, mother and daughter, finally seen for who they truly were. Not victims, but the reason truth had a voice again. The office was quiet again, this time in a different way. Not because people had left for the day or because something terrible was hanging in the air, but because things had shifted. The meeting earlier that morning had sent a message. Clear, sharp, undeniable. Rachel Quinn was back. And this time, the company knew exactly who she was and what she stood for. Grayson stood in his office, the skyline behind him glowing gold with the late afternoon sun. He held a folder in his hands, thin but important. He'd gone back and forth about this for days, writing and rewriting the proposal, trying to find the right words. But in the end, it wasn't about the paper. It was about what it meant. Rachel stepped in a few minutes later, still dressed in her work clothes, from the announcement. She looked tired but composed. He noticed her eyes first. They weren't guarded like before, but they weren't wide open either. She was here, but she was still measuring him, still weighing what came next. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," Grayson said. Rachel gave a small shrug. "You said it was important." He nodded and handed her the folder. "It is." She opened it slowly, scanning the first page, then the second. Her brow furrowed slightly. When she looked back up, there was a trace of something like surprise in her voice. "Chief Operating Officer of Internal Security Operations? You already built half of our systems," he said. "Now, I want you to lead the team that keeps them safe." Rachel looked down again, reading the offer more carefully. The salary, the benefits, the scope of authority. It wasn't just a promotion, it was a seat at the table. The kind of role she'd never dared to aim for before, not because she wasn't capable, but because no one had ever believed in her enough to make it possible. She closed the folder and held it in her hands. "What about trust?" she asked quietly. Grayson looked at her, not as a boss or a CEO, but as a man trying to undo something he couldn't forget. "It's earned," he said. "Not with words, with actions. And I hope I'm earning it now." Rachel studied him for a long moment. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but thoughtful. Then she slowly nodded. "You're not there yet," she said. He smiled a little, accepting that. "But you're closer than you were," she added. Grayson's smile deepened, and for once, it wasn't the cool, rehearsed one he used in meetings. It was real. Rachel looked at the folder again. "I'll think about it," she said. "Take your time," he replied. "But for what it's worth, this place is better with you in it." As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Lila asked me last night if good people ever get the chance to build things," she said softly. "Maybe now I can tell her yes." Then she walked out, leaving Grayson standing in the warm light, knowing that sometimes the hardest earned trust is the one that matters most. The morning light spilled gently across the city as Rachel pulled up in front of the Tech Institute. The building was sleek and modern, buzzing with the energy of kids heading in with backpacks slung over one shoulder, eyes bright with possibility. In the passenger seat, Lila sat quietly, her tablet tucked in her lap, her hair pulled back in a loose braid Rachel had woven just minutes before. She wasn't nervous, not exactly, but she held the seatbelt a little tighter than usual. Rachel leaned over and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "You ready?" she asked softly. Lila nodded. "I've been ready." Rachel smiled. "Of course you have." They stepped out of the car, and Rachel walked Lila to the steps. Other parents waved, called after their kids, handed over forgotten lunches, but Rachel didn't need to say anything else. Lila just turned, gave her a small nod, and walked inside with a kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing her place in the world was finally opening up. This wasn't just any camp. It was a scholarship-based program for young coders, part of a new outreach initiative launched by the Vale Foundation. Grayson had named it quietly, without ceremony. But Rachel had known what it meant the moment she saw the application details. The criteria listed intelligence, resilience, and a habit of noticing things others miss. Lila's name had been at the top of the invite list. Rachel watched the doors close behind her daughter, then turned and walked back to her car, her heels clicking lightly on the pavement. She wasn't headed home. Not anymore. She was headed to her office, her corner office, overlooking the city from the executive floor, COO of Internal Security Operations. It still felt surreal sometimes, but every time she logged in, every time she sat at that desk and made decisions that shaped the future of the company, she remembered the version of herself who had once cried into a sink, believing her career was over. She passed through the company's front lobby with a nod to the security guard, who smiled and tipped his cap. The morning crowd was filtering in, and a few new hires glanced at her with curiosity, unsure whether to greet her. She walked past them with quiet purpose, stopping for just a moment in front of the new installation on the far wall. It was simple. A metal plaque with dark engraving, elegant and precise. Sometimes the smallest voice speaks the biggest truth. Below it, framed in clear glass, was a child's drawing. Crayon and colored pencil on plain white paper. Two figures standing side by side, one tall and one small, in front of a desk surrounded by computers. A third figure stood in the background, behind a tall window, smiling. In the corner of the page was a single name in block letters. Lila. Rachel smiled softly. No speech, no announcement, just a long breath and a quiet look. Then she turned, shoulders squared, and walked toward the elevator, ready for whatever came next. Because this time, she wasn't walking alone. She was walking forward, carrying with her everything that mattered most. If this story moved you like it moved us, don't forget to give it a like. And if you want more powerful stories like this one, hit subscribe. We'd love to have you with us.